I'm Drew O'Barge. I'm a museum specialist at the National Museum of American History. I do a little bit of everything. I do collections work, I do research, I do exhibitions, and also recently I've been doing also some game design as well for the Smithsonian. I work with the video game collection as well as some other collections as well. And I want to, Justin here will introduce himself.
So I also work at the National Museum of American History. I'm Justin Barber. I'm a contractor at the museum, which kind of allows me to hop around a lot of different projects. I am currently working on the Video Game Pioneer Oral History Archive, which we'll talk a little bit about during this presentation. And I also have worked on things like the Virtual Landscapes exhibition that's at the museum currently, alongside with Drew here, as well as some other random video game projects. And we'll be doing a talk tomorrow as well on video games in galleries, which is based on a lot of the types of research that I've been doing. So that's a little bit of what I'm.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for coming at 7 p.m. I know it's dinner time. Some of you might be already eaten or waiting to eat, so we really appreciate you coming out. So I wanted to give you an outline of what we're going to talk about so that you can decide, well, would you want to stay or not? I mean, it's totally up to you. The MAGFest is a busy place. You know, there's a lot of panels going on, a lot of concerts going on. It might be dinner time, so we want to be upfront with what you're going to hear and see here today, and then you can go from there. So we're going to do introductions. I mean, we started this. We're going to talk a little bit about the museum, our collections, and why we're coming here to talk. We're going to talk about the main takeaways, like what are you going to take away from this this presentation. If anything else, we want you to come away with simple, basic concepts. And then we'll provide some examples. So video games in the military, health in video games, innovation, invention, who makes video games, and politicizing video games. These are all topics that obviously cover a great deal of American history, different areas. We want to show like how video games intertwine with all these things. And then we'll end with summary and discussion and questions. What we also want to be upfront about is that not all the talks going to be about Super Mario Brothers. So if that's the only reason you're here, then I don't want to disappoint you. But we'll try to tie it back in, to Super Mario Brothers and Nintendo quite a bit, so you can see where it can be framed in different ways. So, and before I continue, I want to make sure this talk is accessible as possible. So volume check. Everybody's okay here? Louder, okay. I'll keep trying, okay. I will, if you need sign language interpreters, we have one up front, so if you need sign language interpreter. If you have low vision or blind, I have copies of the slides that you can hand out, and then we'll make it away up front, and then you have close-up copies of the slides. I will try to verbally describe what the images on the screen as well. And we don't have any mics here, so, other than what's here at the front. So we're going to have some question and answers, and then so please shout so that the interpreter can interpret for me as well, because I'm hard of hearing, so I need the interpreter. So make sure the interpreter can hear you, then you can interpret for us. And if you can't hear me, please interrupt. So I want to make sure you can hear. Yes. So, all right. And then I wanted to start off with a land acknowledgement. I wanted to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of Piscataway Nation. This place is on the banks of Potomac River, which is the European spelling of the Potawatomi tribe. This acknowledgement demonstrates a commitment to dismantling ongoing legacies of colonialization across the United States. So as we go through our talk, the convention, stuff like that, consider how we got to be this place and the complexities of this, history. So we're the National Museum of American History. So we have the blessing and the curse to collect everything. And by everything, means abacus, to kites, and to zithers. Did I get that right?
Yeah, zithers.
Zithers, okay. Yeah, trouble pronouncing it yesterday. So And so we collect everything, but that means that it's challenging because we have to collect for a lot of things. We have tons of storage, but it fills up really quickly, and we don't have a lot of exhibition space as well. So, so we have to be very considerate about what we collect, what we exhibit, and how it all ties in together. And we can't be comprehensive. We can't collect everything. So we just have to be very conscious about that. So. So the video game collection is about 300 objects in the museum, and one of those objects is actually the Nintendo Game Boy. And on the left, you will see the Game Boy with the National Museum of Your American History. That's kind of you can see like this says "Your Story" in red, and that's just a advertising slogan, tactic. We're trying to make the museum personal to you, like you're supposed to be connected to the museum. And you'll see it below is American culture now on view. But the interesting thing is the Game Boy actually isn't in an exhibition about American culture. The Game Boy is actually on exhibit on the right, and it's an exhibit on American enterprise, American business. And that can make sense somewhat. But what it actually is it's in a section called Going Mobile. So what that talks about is the idea that now your phones, one device does many different functions that you used to require different devices for. So you have gaming, which the Game Boy represents. You have photography, which back then you had to carry around your digital camera. Cell phones, which you have your own cell phones, PDAs, email, all that kind of stuff. Now it's all on one device. So the Game Boy is used to represent the gaming section of that. So, but it was very much easily, it could have been something else in the it could have talked about transnationalism, like how Japanese and American come together, the business practices, all that kind of stuff. It could have been somewhere else in that exhibit, but also somewhere else in the museum, but it just happens to be right there. So this kind of gives us the hint of like, there are different ways that an object can be displayed in the museum, not just one way, and there are many different stories and histories. So our main takeaways that I'm hoping you will walk out today is thinking that, oh, video games is bigger, it's part of a larger American history, right? So it's not just, sometimes we tend to get so close up and say, oh, this happened, this happened, this happened, but not examine other things that might have had an impact on it, or how video games had an impact on other parts of the industry, or business, or culture, and all these kind of stuff. So, but it did, and we're trying to show that. So, there are also many different ways to look at the same object, game, and story. As you see here, as you saw the Game Boy, it was in an exhibition. It was in a case that I thought was super interesting, and it could have been somewhere else. We could use it in a different exhibit, and you'll see as we go through it that there are many different ways we could have used the same game in different contexts and stuff like that. Video games are not necessarily historically unique, and that's okay. Because that just shows that it's part of a larger story, that usually when things happen, it just comes to, it's happened before in other industries, or it draws a lot of parallels to like film or businesses or all these kind of stuff, that it's not unique. And that's even better, because that makes video games richer for it, because it connects to other parts of the industry, and then actually it makes that larger history, like film history, more interesting as well. So it works both ways. And that we need to continue to seek out different stories from different angles, because American history is a big puzzle, and so is video game history. Like, we're still missing a lot of the pieces. We don't know what history looks like, so we're continuing to figure out how we're going to put what does history look like, and all that kind of stuff. And even though it's very recent, there's a lot of stuff we still don't know about, or we're still uncovering as we go. So, so we need to continue to seek out different stories from different angles. Okay, so I'm going to pause a little bit and have a little bit of a Q&A. So I want to pose this question to you first. What does Super Mario Brothers have to do with American history? And feel free to shout out, what you might think. World War One. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. You're talking about the history of Nintendo?
No, it's the Italian influence on World War One.
Oh, the influence on World War One. Okay. Oh, okay. So the Italian. Oh, that's interesting. The Italian imagery of Mario and its impact. Okay. Yep.
I could probably say it's like after the crash of Atari, that Nintendo actually became pretty much a family product just around, or actually brought that video home system back in again that was lost during after Atari. So it kind of you could probably say it is part of American history, because it's that second era of video game history that the family just got around and started playing together.
So just to shortly recap, he's just saying that after Atari crashed, the Nintendo became the family product and basically the second wave of video games, basically, what you're saying. Yeah. Yep. We'll talk a little bit about that too, and some of the key people who might have been important in establishing that era. So.
The changing relationship between Japan and the United States after World War II, in the 80s, with lots of panic around how Japan is going to supersede the US, and even in later in the decade around panic of even people affiliated with Nintendo buying the Seattle Mariners, for instance, and that being a big controversy.
Yep. So you mentioned about the Japan panic, the idea that the changing relationship between Japan and the United States, the fear that Nintendo would take over, America, not necessarily directly, but like, becoming more larger part of the United States, correct? Yeah, okay. We'll do one more.
It changed the way that video games were advertised and marketed in the United States.
Changes in way that video games were advertised and marketed in the United States. Absolutely, yeah. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So yeah, very good start so far. Wow. Okay. So we're going to start with video games military, and we'll turn it over to Justin.
All right. So, as many of you might know, much of the technology that would form the basis of video games originated with the military. The race for technological superiority in World War II specifically pushed the need for computers and visual displays to the forefront. But the military's influence and self-interest in early video games doesn't stop there. This is certainly an area where we, as the National Museum of American History, can do a better job to represent video games' complex relationship and its past with our military. For example, oh wait, are we clicking here? Oh, sorry. There we are. For example, Tennis for Two, which is cited as one of the earliest video games, but not represented in our collections, was developed by William Higginbotham, who worked on radar systems at MIT during World War II, as well as the ignition system for the first nuclear bomb. This technological experience with oscilloscopes and early computer technology would serve him well in the development of the game, which was first publicly displayed in 1958. Both creator and creation would be a centerpiece in the legal proceedings regarding Ralph Baer's claim to exclusive patent ownership of the concept of displaying interactive objects on a television screen. This is a key turning point in the history of consumer video games industry. Is it going? No, I'm disconnected. There we are. So the development of Space War in 1962 is not only an outgrowth of military research collaboration with MIT, it was also directly inspired by the Cold War driven space race. In fact, the three original creators of the concept of space war all cite that the shock of the Soviets' first manned spaceflight in 1961 spurred them in part to think about doing an outer space oriented computer game for their new school lab computer, the PDP-1, to teach people about the physics of outer space and rocket ships. Now, the PDP-1 itself is a direct descendant of the Whirlwind computer at MIT, which was developed to calculate bomb trajectories for the US Navy. While an original copy of Space War on paper tape and a non-functional PDP-1 are part of our collections, We continue to look for opportunities to share stories like this through our efforts such as the Video Game Pioneer Oral History Collection and events like our reunion of the original Space War developers, which we did in late 2018. Go ahead. I don't know why I'm disconnected. So the other area we hope to better represent in the future are video games that never made it into the public eye due to their classified nature as tools of the military. For example, the lesser-known Hutspiel represents one of the U.S. military's first attempts to adapt the strategic tradition of wargaming into computer simulation. While its impact on video game history is minimal, its success at running simulations of Cold War escalation and nuclear warfare would be convincing enough to keep the military investing in computer simulations going forward. Go ahead.
Before we keep going, I wanted to mention that a lot of the objects that we're going to show on the screens are not in the museum. The one exception is the Space War.
That's why I said
object in the PDP ones that we have in the collection.
So even as we get into the origins of the commercial video game industry, the military would continue to have a key role in its emergence, like nearly all technological innovations of this period. Ralph Baer began his experiments with interactive television while serving as a military contractor with Sander and Associates, also a military contractor, in the late 1960s. Secretly using spare parts in a closed-off room, Ralph and his partner, Robert Tremblay, would begin developing the technology that would form the basis of the first video game console, an aspect of Baer's story that's not well represented by his inventor's workshop on display at the museum. Interestingly enough, nearly 20 years earlier, in 1947, a lead television engineer at Dumont Laboratories would have a strikingly similar idea to Ralph in adapting television technology to interactive entertainment. The cathode ray tube amusement device was developed and patented by Thomas T. Goldsmith and Estelle Ray Mann, both of whom worked on radar technology during the Second World War. It came at a time when the possibilities of television entertainment was just coming into view. This device is not known to have ever made it past the prototype stage due to color television development taking priority, but it is cited by Ralph Baer's own television gaming apparatus and method patent. One notable fact is that the game experience itself was a missile simulation, not unlike Atari's Missile Command, but with static targets. Which demonstrates that the military could naturally influence content as well as technology. While it is quite unlikely that the original prototype still exists, it does not mean that there isn't an interesting story to be told here and explored further. This isn't all to say that the relationship between video games and the military is one way. For example, Atari's hit game Battlezone from 1980 impressed the U.S. Army enough to request a special adaptation be made that would simulate the operation of a Bradley tank in combat situations. Only one copy of the game is known to have survived thanks to a private collector. But this would also be an interesting story to tell in our museum, even if we don't collect it. Not only for the insight into America's often complex and contentious relationship with its military, but also how similar it can parallel current events. Consider this, when Atari's employees first were informed of the military's interest in Battlezone, most, including the game's creator, were not keen on the idea that their game would be utilized for combat training and would refuse to work on the Bradley trainer without serious stipulations. While much of this protest came at a time where the shadow of the Vietnam War loomed large in American mindset, it is not unlike recent years where developers have tested their own companies for developing or for collaborating with government agencies they disagree with morally or ethically. Take, for example, the recent Google employee walkout protest against the company's collaboration with the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement and the U.S. Customs Border and Protections. In more recent years, the military's interest has extended far beyond simulation technology into intelligence gathering and recruitment. America's Army, originally released in 2002, was developed by the United States Army as a direct attempt to identify and recruit prospective soldiers. In contrast, Full Spectrum Warrior was created by the U.S. Army University Affiliated Research Center for the explicit purpose of utilizing contemporary video game console technologies to create realistic combat situations or simulations in partnership with video game industry developers. This game would be recognized, but would even be recognized by the E3 Game Critics Award in 2003, prior to its release on PC, PS2, and Xbox. Glenn cleared. However, the military's move to directly engage with the public through video games has not prevented it from consequently and ironically becoming a shared platform against political and military, becoming a shared platform of political protest against the military. Currently on display in short video form at the Akron Museum of Art, Joseph DeLappey's Dead in Iraq project began in 2006 as a documented virtual protest against the U.S. military's intervention in Iraq. DeLappey would log into the game and begin typing out the names, ages, service branch, and death date of each service person who had died in the actual Iraqi conflict to all players engaged in that session, recording the event as he proceeded. As you can imagine, the response to the responses from other players is quite visceral. These are the types of difficult and complex subjects that are indicative of the types of stories we hope to tell in the future at the National Museum of American History.
Okay, so I wanted to show the Space Invader vitamin and talk about health and video games. You can admire the lovely picture I took maybe 8 years ago. So this is actually the first object related to video games collected by the museum back in 1983. And it might seem weird, like why is it a Space Invader? Like why is it vitamins? Like why is it of all things we collect? Like why is it? Well, like a lot of the things related to our video game collection, it was actually kind of coincidental. Like this came in with a session of different vitamins actually, and then this was just one of them that the company P. Linear was selling as well. So, so I thought it was like super interesting that back then, back in the 70s and 80s, like children's vitamins were all the craze, like the Flintstone vitamins and Bugs Bunny vitamins. A lot of people were taking them. And I want to show you a related commercial and keep an eye on the end for a surprise cameo.
In the children's vitamin game, this is today's leader. But for moms who want to change the rules to no sugar and no additives, this is a better choice. New Pac-Man Children's Chewable Multivitamins. For no sugar, Pac-Man's better. Flintstones is over 70% sugar. For no additives, Pac-Man is better. So for complete nutrition of 10 essential vitamins plus iron without sugar or additives.
Goodbye, Fred. Hello, Pac-Man.
A better choice.
Anybody know who that was? Fred Savage from Wonder Years, yeah. Yeah, so I think that's also another part, right? So in the early 80s, there were all these commercials being done for video games, and so like Fred Savage, Jack Black actually took a part in a commercial for Pitfall. Phil Hartman, a comedian, did some commercials for ice hockey for Activision, Atari. So you can kind of like, they had their start in video game history if you wanted to look at their career. So, so moving on away from pills, we can also look at, video games have always been associated with, being a sedentary, antisocial, unhealthy lifestyle. But there are ways that, video games actually have contributed to health, either directly or indirectly. One of them is like this power pad, that was made for the Nintendo Entertainment System that, you would obviously run, really quickly run, jump, all these kind of stuff. And it gives you physical activity, or also known as exercise. So we see that, recurring. We see that recurring again with the Wii Fit, And the Wii Fit, I'm not going to say it's the first, purposeful exercise game, but it certainly was one of the more popular ones where it measured your BMI, try to give you workout fitness, it tried to, encourage you to stay healthy and fit. And, we see that with the Ring Fit Adventure released for the Switch recently. But then also think about, as when you had the Nintendo and Sega and all that kind of stuff, the crowd was younger, and it was getting a little bit older. But once you hit the Wii, it was much more older, casual crowd that all of a sudden this could probably support these kind of games. Where exercise also became not just for kids, but adults that may want to have more fun exercising indoors. Replace their treadmills, replace their stationary bikes. Avoid going to the gym. I don't like gyms, so I preferred, if I can exercise at home, or and gamify my exercise. Really, well, that's what I'm looking to seek, and in a lot of ways, WeFit gave that opportunity. In the same way we've done with like Brain Age, right? So you try to mentally train yourself, and that became a very popular fad back in the, a couple years ago, and so we've seen more and more of these like video games that's associated with health, and then ways like if we looked at it alone, we'd probably like forget, but if you look at the overall trend, so what does it have to do with Mario, right? So, well, probably not a whole lot actually. If you see the vitamins up there left, that's common, like they use their imagery, and then there's a DDR. DDR was also a very popular form of, exercise, especially if you, did it at a very high rate and stuff like that. You see these people sweat bullets downstairs, I'm sure there's, running all that kind of stuff. But then there's also Dr. Mario, right? So, I don't know if he's a real doctor, like he just diagnoses three of your viruses and colors and listens to your heart in a chip tune kind of thing, and just drills all these kind of pills at you, hoping you feel better. But if you have any ideas, like if you can think of something that we haven't thought of yet, I would love to hear it during the question and answer.
So innovation and invention is another topic that not only factors heavily into video game history, but also in American history in general. After all, the reason why the National Museum of American History features a Hall of Invention, an exhibit called Places of Invention, an education center focused on invention, and the Lemelson Center, which is entirely dedicated to the study of innovation and invention. It's not a coincidence that Ralph Baer's Brown Box, his workshop, and his personal papers are all found among these spaces. Additionally, the museum will soon make the ever-growing video game pioneer archive oral history collection publicly available, which I'm humbled to be a part of through my work at the Lemelson Center. So stay tuned to that. We'll probably be announcing that on Twitter. The innovation and invention gets to the heart of the American spirit, story, and dream. It should come as no surprise that video games find themselves neatly settled in a much larger American narrative in that way. Ralph Baer, the creator of the Brown Box and the subsequent Magnavox Odyssey, the first video game console, plays witness to the American story through his experience as not only an inventor, but as a Jewish immigrant who fled pre-World War II Germany as a child just prior to the tragic events of Kristallnacht. In the United States, Ralph would serve his country in World War II and learning radio and electrical engineering in the process. This in turn would fuel his inventive nature, leading to his creation of the predecessor of all video game home consoles, along with many other inventions. From outcast to veteran to celebrated inventor, the story of the Brown Box and the Magnavox Odyssey is also the triumph of Ralph Baer's personal American Odyssey. In fact, Ralph's archetypical story is not uncommon among the early inventors of video game technology and innovation. Many come from humble backgrounds who have, by happenstance or circumstance, found themselves on the path to becoming forefathers of the video game medium. They hailed from many rural parts of America with a keen desire to innovate and learn new technology. It's important to note that this was not restricted to video games alone. Many of these inventors would also further computer technology in significant ways that are often, but not always, overshadowed by their video game creator status. For example, on the top left, the creators of Space War found themselves, many of them found themselves in computer engineering jobs post-MIT to further innovation in commercial microcomputer technology and programming, as well as refining and improving U.S. military defense systems. On the top right, we have William Crowther, who created the Colossal Cave Adventure, the first text adventure which many subsequent game creators found themselves inspired by. But he was also a key part of the original ARPA development team, which would eventually serve as the foundation of the internet today. On the bottom left, we have Al Alcorn, the creator of Pong, who would later become part of a team to produce one of the very first video codecs, which made things like YouTube possible, as well as a computer encryption software that is now used in all video game gambling machines. And of course, there's our last guy here, Mr. Steve Wozniak, who co-developed the video game Breakout with Steve Jobs at Atari before they broke off to start their small startup company, Apple. So yeah, all of them are incredibly successful in their impact. Video games are not, but also representing the key issue but they also represent a key issue when exploring early video game pioneers. By just taking a casual look at this picture, I'm guessing somebody out in the audience can tell me what that is. Lack of diversity. Yep. So, yeah. So, we'll discuss, as we'll discuss in a bit, representing the hidden voices of minorities is a bit of a challenge in an industrial history, which has often overlooked their significant contributions. Truth of the matter is that we have our work cut out for us in equitably representing not only less visible innovators and enablers in video game history, but doing so in a much broader context of our complex and diverse American culture, which we, as the National Museum of American History, are actively pursuing despite the considerable challenges ahead of us. So another thing to consider is how the video game industry fits within the larger context of American technological innovations. For example, companies like Atari would find themselves swapping personnel, innovations, and business deals with major computer industry players, such as the aforementioned Apple computers. Fairchild, which never was ever really a major video game industry player, would contribute significantly to its success thanks to a certain engineer named Jerry Lawson. More on him a little bit later. But other engineers who worked on Fairchild's semiconductor technology would go on to create AMD, which is not far from their future competitor Intel. In fact, many of these companies all found themselves in Silicon Valley, or the fact that they found themselves all in Silicon Valley meant that many of their employees freely interchanged between them, making for a rather incestuous industry in the early days. It also has the markings of an interesting and unique American story that we hope to explore more in the future. Of course, even today, tech giants such as Facebook and Tesla can credit much of their success to advancements and innovations in the game industry, cementing its place in the larger context of American history.
Okay, so in response to, the white male kind of conversation, I think part of it, what we need to do is broaden who makes video games, and shift the conversation that way. There are panels there's one panel tomorrow by Elaine Nooney who will talk about 3 female employees at Sierra Online, and to talk about a lot of our history focuses on game designers and composers and artists if we know them. And a lot of truth be told, a lot of games are not made by Concerned Ape, who does everything, and then just, but fact looks more kind of like this, right? This giant list of people who, participate in games. So, but then also you have to consider yourself as a role in this, right? So you buy the games, you participate, you're coming here to MAGFest, you show your brand loyalty. You all this thing, so you have a part in this stake of who makes video games, because without yours, fandom, without your purchase, your dollars and all that kind of stuff, the industry won't last. We wouldn't be here right today if you were actively participating in this. So to broaden all this kind of stuff. But when we look broader, but there's also even in game design history, we know Roberta Williams of Sierra Online, we know Amy Henning from Naughty Dog. We can name some famous people, female game designers, or some people I will talk about shortly. and Carol Shaw, Danielle Bunbury. But this is also a subject that's huge and massive. I'm not going to do this justice by any means. Like this is, a topic. But luckily, there's a lot of scholars that are here presenting on this topic. So, including one by Whitney Powell just recently on transgender and queer history. Javon Gord presented on.
Jerry Lawson.
Jerry Lawson, thank you. Lane Nunes presenting on Women and Sierra Online. And Carly Kosarek and Rachel Simone Wheel just presented recently about female games and girl gaming and all that kind of stuff. So these scholars are tremendous in promoting this, and there are many else out there that are doing this work. So we hope to continue the work. So, and this idea of like who makes game is not our ideas, but it's done by these scholars that hope to shift the framework. For the Atari, I was looking through to see Atari at the beginning was very segregated. Like the women would work in constructing PCBs, and then the men would build the arcade cabinets. And what I found that Carol Cantor on the left actually created one of the first early marketing research departments. Not actually the first, because Magbox actually had one, and they helped rename the Odyssey to what it became. But she was super instrumental, obviously, as, getting feedback from the players, deciding what they like, what they don't like, and all that kind of stuff. And so tremendous in shaping video game, how the trajectory of the game. But then marketing research is also not unique, right? You buy a product, they'll ask you, what do you think about this product? Amazon reviews, all these kind of stuff. Like marketing research drives everything that we do, and video games are no exception to this, And then on the right, you got Christine Maddox, Christine Bush, before she was married, and she worked in, creating PCB board, which holds the guts of the game, basically. And in one of the books I was reading, she developed a machine that would test the chip to make sure they were functioning, and it was one of the first things that that Atari had, and it was just like, okay, so this is the first quality control, quality assurance kind of thing that Atari devised, and it was a woman who created it. Yet we don't know much about her, we're just not given that attention to, who is it that we're focusing on. And then, we have Jerry Lawson, African American history, creator of the Fairchild Channel F, sorry. But even before that, he created one of the first arcade cabinets that used a microprocessor, which got him to Fairchild, which we just mentioned. And then they create one of the first programmable game cartridges. So, and then Atari did the same thing, and they take off. They're much more successful. But this morning, I just learned of another African American who lived around the same time and programmed the MP1000 for APF Electronics in New York, Ed Smith. And but these are the two African Americans that we can, think of. I'm sure there might be others, and there are others, so let's, make sure we acknowledge that. But we also have to acknowledge why they aren't there as well. I mean, it ties to the, legacy of racism, segregation, and even going back all the way to slavery to deny them, the opportunities, policies such as redlining, segregation, school segregation, all that kind of stuff, denied them the opportunities, the experiences, the capabilities to be able to rise up in the ranks to join the, what we call a pipeline problem. And the same thing with the women's, right? It's rampant sexism in the workplace environment dating back to the 60s, the stigma that STEM had for girls and women, all that kind of stuff. So we need to acknowledge all that kind of all parts of it, even though, at the time, segregation did exist when video games did. Well, mostly video games didn't, but so we need to acknowledge all that that part of American history. So going into what you mentioned earlier about Nintendo being the second wave. This is Gail Tilden, who was the first marketing manager for Nintendo, and basically she created all these vocabularies that try to differentiate yourself from Atari, right? So Atari, was a highly successful thing, then it experienced a crash, and then all of a sudden video games became this toxic word. Nobody wants to talk about video games. Retailers don't want to touch it and all that kind of stuff. So they have to rebrand themselves. So the Nintendo Entertainment System, the Control Pack, Control Deck, game packs. all these kind of things. So she was very instrumental in working with advertisers and getting all this kind of stuff. And then she also creates Nintendo Power, right? So how many of you read Nintendo Power growing up? Well, a lot. I mean, like, so this is like, we're creating a common language here. You are being influenced by what you read. You know, you probably, I saw this game in Nintendo Power, I want to buy it. Who makes the decisions about that? You know, her, because she's the editor-in-chief, you know, not just her, but with a group of people, but she's a significant portion in deciding what you probably consumed, who got top billing, who, you know, what's featuring the games, all that kind of stuff. Back when the internet, we didn't, you know, you're a kid, this is probably the only source of information you had, other than your kids, you know, school kids, but it's a pretty significant source of information. So, so she deserves a lot of credit to what we played in culture. So, but she's not a game designer, she's not an executive, you know, she's a marketing manager, but that's also very common too. We see this a lot of in other companies where there's usually marketing managers are women, and then how they shaped how we experience games back in the 80s, 90s, even to today's are thanks to women. So if we shift our thinking from game designers, composers and musicians, I think we'll find a lot more I know we will find a lot more women and minorities and people LGBTQs and all these people, people with disabilities and all that kind of stuff. So. And then we'll move on to our last topic. We're going to speed through this a little bit because we've taken a lot of your time. I want to make sure we have time for questions. So we come to Death Race, and one thing I didn't mention about Jerry Lawson, I've been trying to track down the legacy of Jerry Lawson's, arcade cabinet. He created a game called Demolition Derby, and that was the basis for Death Race. But there's no link into saying like his Demolition Derby was what became Death Race. There's some conflicting information, but so this is one of the first moral panic, right? So this comes out, and people are upset. Parents are upset. They talk to their politicians. They say, "Hey, we can't have this in our community. It's going to ruin our children." And all of a sudden, it gets a lot more attention, right? So it's the Barbra Streisand effect. It's not available. Now all of a sudden, it's become more popular. And but so this is the first moral panic. And as we know, like there's others that anytime there's an entertainment product, the movies and back in the 30s, like there's the moral panic. They set up the code and then eventually create a rating system. And then you have in the 1950s comic books. Comic books, they worried about juvenile delinquency, they were concerned about violence and sexuality, and then they self-censored. Music did that in the 1980s, and we'll see it again here in 1993, this famous 1993 hearings, spurred by Mortal Kombat on the upper left, and probably more so Night Trap, and then the bottom are guns called Justifiers. And these three all sparked this moral panic, and it's Sega versus Nintendo, right? Basically, Nintendo's positioning itself as this do-good company. We, self-censor. All of our content's appropriate for children, all that kind of stuff. And Nintendo's like edgy, pushing the edge. Sega does what Sega doesn't. All this kind of stuff. But in the end, so long story short, in the end, the companies actually figured out it's better to work together than against each other, and they create what now becomes the ESA, Entertainment Software Agency Association. And comes like a trade group, like any other trade group. So, and then also creates the. I'm sorry.
Well, I have to ask, considering the time frame, the Night Trap, the young lady on the cover. There's a striking resemblance to Tanya Harding. That's the
That's Dana Kato.
Good?
Dana Kato from Different Strokes.
Yeah.
It also had a shady past.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So my next point I want to make is that they come together to create a video game rating system, which we use today. And that's not different in movies. Music used like explicit, non-explicit content, all that kind of stuff. So then it's ways. And then later on we see moral panics don't really go away, right? They come again in 2005. They come again recently. Every time there's a school shooting, usually blame go to video games and violence. So I think for a long time we're not going to see this go away, and it's actually very cyclical. Like you're going to see this come and go. So I just want to throw in this last tweet by Nintendo of America. The DC mayor is Muriel Bowser, would felt the same way. And so Nintendo of America is trying to play with her last name and get her into like, hey, join the Bowser team and all that kind of stuff, which, most people, I mean, one, it has the cultural cachet to be able to do that, right? People know what Bowser is, and they know Mario, they can associate that. But then two, Bowser's, a bad dude, generally. I mean, there's some exceptions. And so to accentuate that the DC mayor joined the bad team, everybody can know that's a joke, but I think if you didn't have that cultural cachet, that would have been a harder, sell, or people wouldn't get it, or when they look it up, they'd be, confused, So they were able to leverage their brand, their knowledge, their cultural, the fact that it's very much well known in cultural, whether you play video games or not, so. Okay, so I want to turn this back to you. Well, we'll come back to this. I just want to, Justin mentioned we'll have 2 presentations tomorrow, one at 10 a.m. If you're an art history fan, Video Game Art History 102, Plane, Trains, and Chocobos. And then at 1 p.m., Can I Play It? But Can I Play It? Video Games and Gallery Spaces. So if we want to try to answer this question again, ask questions, all this kind of stuff. So we'll leave it, the floor is yours. So again, shout very loudly and we'll repeat the questions.
Thank you all for listening, by the way, and putting us with our mild rantings. Any questions?
Yeah.
Sure.
I do have one question.
Sure.
So is Nintendo product like Zelda, Super Mario Brothers, Donkey Kong? Do you believe that's also just as much a part of American culture now? Since it's been with us in such a long time?
Yeah, I would say it was part of American culture. I mean, there's different ways you can look at it, right? So one thing, you can look at it from a technological angle too, the Zelda pack was actually the first to have a battery pack inside that allows you to save, which is, back then you used passwords or you used floppy disk or whatever, but for the Nintendo Entertainment System, you would use the battery pack. I think there's
and I would say that those games, because of their popularity and because there's been a consistency of them being present, over a sustained period of time, that's created a common experience. Mm-hmm. If you've played Legend of Zelda in the original NES form, but then your kid plays Breath of the Wild for the first time, you have a common lexicon there and a common experience because those games generally have the same objective. It's just achieved in different clever ways. So I think that that's part of why it's really started to integrate itself into, how we talk about things, how we, are able to say things like, shout out to Mayor Bowser, because people will pick that up because people were, reading the manuals that talked about Bowser in 1985. So, and I think that you'll see more and more of that. One of the things I find interesting, and because mostly one example I like, but it's actually a Japanese example, is the impact of Dragon Quest, which is known as Dragon Warrior early on in the U.S. time. They had to shorten words in order to make things like fight and spells names, like healing and all this, in Japanese in order to make it work. And what they found is that people started actually using those words as replacements in everyday language, and now it's actually part of the lexicon of Japanese language. And I think we've seen some of that ourselves, things like boss, level, I'm going to level up, +1, that kind of stuff. So I think that, that's how you're seeing video games in general start to become part of our culture in ways that's more than just having a video game. So, any other questions?
I will note that the list we had a laundry list, at least 10 or 15. And so the one I will want to point out, they talked about this idea of Japan coming to America. That was really a big one about, the idea that we experienced Japan, through these games. We know, I traveled to Japan a couple years ago, and video games was a big part of the reason why, and my understanding, my experience, and all that kind of stuff. And there's also significant cultural differences in the business practice and localization, all that kind of stuff. So it's very rich in understanding United States relationship with Japan through cultural means as well as business means. So I just wanted to mention that since he was mentioning that. So.
So let me ask you guys then, is there any part of this that you didn't see in this presentation or something you'd like to see represented as part of something in the American History Museum? Deep dive a little bit more into that. I mean, obviously we could only have so much time to talk about all the subjects that we want to talk about, but go for it. Uh-huh. Yeah, the suggestion was in health portion talking about how video games have integrated with mental health issues, and I think that some of the examples that we heard even earlier talk about that, like when they talked about Liza earlier in one of the earlier sessions that was supposed to mimic a psychologist speaking back to you. Yeah, I think that that's one of those areas I think would be fantastic. I mean, it's not only intersected in terms of one of the things I find very fascinating in more recent times is the use of VR to create scenarios and simulations that are helped to create empathy and help people get over fears. It was used in a lot of PTSD treatments. So I think absolutely that's something that we would hope to include at some point.
Yeah, and with DR and all that kind of stuff, you can train doctors, you can create patients, you do surgery, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, absolutely.
More a comment than a question. I was kind of anticipating that you were talking about video games and military, kind of two aspects where you started talking about how they take the military equipment to drum up simulations, and today we do virtual reality simulations. But also in acts of war now, we have cargo containers in Missouri piloting drones halfway around the world. And it's not the older folks making the decisions on actually pulling the triggers anymore. It's low-level kids because they grew up with joysticks and they grew up with video games. That just is natural to them. And the mental impact on that too is that they don't feel the PTSD effects that you were just talking about because to them it is a video game. They're sitting in Missouri and they didn't kill anybody, even though in reality they did.
Right. So the comment is trying to connect. The one thing to elaborate on the military connection is how video games are similar to what we have in terms of controlling drones and remote controlling technology, which is very similar to a video game and using people who may have grown up with video games but may also be disassociated with the actions that they're doing in real life. And that absolutely is something that I think needs to be looked at. It's one of these aspects that I think is an ongoing question about, technology in warfare and how it's constantly changing the game. This has happened, consistently over, thousands of years at this point. And I think that is something that we need to be very cautious and think about and be reflective on, especially as we, teeter every day closer to another conflict, as the last couple of days has been. So, so yeah, I absolutely think that's something that we can address. And like I said, there's a ton of topics that we just kind of had to pick and choose for the sake of this, but I love to hear your guys' ideas.
One thing that I wanted to see was the use of video games in nursing homes. Video games are usually associated with the children and being college, but it's actually when they use the technology in nursing homes, it's very beneficial versus if you do the exact opposite. If you introduce that kind of simulation to a child too early, studies show that there's a lot of attention problems. So it actually benefits the older generation more than it does the younger generation, because when you have something like the Wii or virtual reality in nursing homes, you have a very little space, but you're getting exercise, you're getting stimulation, you're seeing like these people can't even get out of bed, they can see forests, they can see things, they can be outside but not be outside because it's so detailed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's correct. Yeah, we could basically we would take the Wii and we could put it in an exhibit about, elder care, or, how do we, how do we care for, people in nursing homes, like all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so that's, we could, take the Wii, a Wiimote, or, Wii Sports, or, show Wii Bowling, all that kind of stuff, and interpret it in that context. So yeah, absolutely.
Another aspect of,
Okay, we'll get you next.
another aspect with healthcare and video games is the work of like Child's Play, the charity, for bringing video games into children's hospital stays that are there for long times in their lives.
Yeah. So one of the things that we didn't talk about, and one of the topics I think is super interesting, is philanthropy in general, right? So back then we had telethons, and maybe they're still a thing, but now it's game-a-thons, right? So we have awesome games done quick coming up soon that, we fundraise for. We have RBG Limit Break. We have Desert Bus for Hope. We have all these kind of things that that our generation is probably more used to, like funding a game-a-thon and doing philanthropic work through that as opposed to a telethon. And so I think we're seeing that shift. We also like cosmetics. Like there was a Mercy skin that was sold for Overwatch that was to support breast cancer. And so so we see video games as an important part of philanthropic. Sorry,
Philanthropic.
work, in that usually means hospitals, like Child's Play or whatever, but also other stuff as well. So I think there was one more hand in the back. Yeah.
It was just an observation that when folks are recovering from strokes, sometimes they put them in front of some of the video games to help them rework the neuroplasticity and making decisions using eye-hand coordination. You go to the therapy centers and the like, you'll see them using off-the-shelf video games, whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the well-written studies, of course, which has now inspired a game, is the Tetris effect. So the Tetris effect is that people who have an inability to build memory, if they play Tetris, they will actually start to dream about Tetris blocks falling and be able to recall that, and it actually helps them start to rebuild those neural pathways. So yes, absolutely. And then, that's an off-the-shelf thing right there that people are using. But I think that that's an excellent point of something that can be inserted into something like this. We should just do a whole exhibit on medicine, science, and video games.
Yeah, we could.
Yeah. Anything else? Anybody else?
Well, thank you. We appreciate you coming. Have a great MAGFest.